Welcome to today's podcast. We're diving into a fascinating Bible story in John 4, focusing on the woman at the well. We'll explore how to read and study the Bible more actively, asking the right questions, and digging deeper into the text. We'll read the story together and then break it down with initial thoughts from Alyssa and Rebecca. We'll examine why this woman is significant, the background of the Samaritans, and the cultural context of her time. We'll consider why she's at the well in the middle of the day, her emotions, and how Jesus interacts with her. Finally, we'll discuss the powerful impact of her decision to share her encounter with others. Join us as we uncover the rich layers of this transformative story. Hey friend, welcome to the Between the Pages podcast, where we explore navigating life's peaks and valleys with bold faith. Join us bi-weekly as we dive into meaningful conversations with guests, team members, and community leaders. Together, we'll tackle topics that challenge and encourage, helping you live out your faith between the pages of everyday life. Welcome, friends, to the podcast. And we are changing things up a little bit this week, and we are going to do a Bible study together. So, if you are listening to this while you're driving, I recommend maybe pause, come back, grab your Bible, do a Bible study with us here later. If you want to listen to it once, then listen back again, and this time with the Bible in hand. If you're watching with us, if you're at home, wherever you may be, grab a Bible, grab a pen, paper, because we're going to do a Bible study on John 4 and the woman at the well. Oop. So with that, Alyssa is going to kind of walk us through this process. She is someone who has spent so much time in the Word, in how she studies the Bible in her own time. And I think first question, asterisk here, there's no right or wrong way to study the Bible.
True.
I study it differently than Alyssa.
Mm-hmm.
There's people out there, if you're in college campus ministries, that have the inductive study or what is it, the ABCs is one.
There's a lot of
different ways to study the Bible. Alyssa, for you, before we dive into the chapter and into our story, what are some quick bullet points of how you study the Bible in your own time?
How do I study the Bible in bullet points? Sometimes I start with a devotional, which is typically it starts with a verse and then gives a little blurb about the verses, how to connect it to life, those type of things, right? So sometimes I use that to kind of get my heart ready, get my brain in that space. And then I take that verse and I read the full context surrounding it. Sometimes I will just pick a part of the gospel or a chapter of a specific book like Philippians 4 or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I will read through it. And then sometimes I use a supplement, like a concordance, or today I left my Bible at home, so I have my handy dandy phone. And sometimes, you can click and it will give you insight or background on specific words and things like that. And I really find it interesting to use a concordance or a phone simply because I can click and it will say the Greek word for this was this, and it's also used in these contexts or whatever, and in these other parts of the Bible, because the Bible is really interwoven. So sometimes I do that. Other times I will kind of read through it once and then read through it again and kind of highlight the phrases that stick out to me and then kind of simply just write out those verses and then say, this reminded me of this because I'm going through this, or this was really impactful to me because it reminded me that God's character is insert the blank, right? So you can do it a lot of different ways, probably depending on time and depending on the season of life you're in, just in general, as far as focus. And, sometimes maybe you're waiting to hear from God more so than you're just curious about God, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can go super deep. You can simply just read and just highlight what hits you that day and then just simply connect with God and say, God, this really hit me because of this. How do you, flipping the script, how do you study the Bible? Bullet points version.
I would say I'm more of I'm a Devo girly. I really love kind of the read the verse, what's the application, and how, and reflecting on that in my life. There's been so many times I'm doing a devotional and it's exactly what I'm going through. Like, I did a
Mhm.
devotional in Ruth, and every single day I was like, I'm going through this right now. I feel added right now. I'm just like getting thrown under the bus right now.
Mhm.
And it was like very impactful. Like, I really kind of love that. Like, I'm a busy girl, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I need my time with the Lord. And so it's a little bit more on the shorter end, but I also really love when our church does like a series on like one
Yes.
particular book of the Bible. Because I feel like in your instance, you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into
Mhm.
like the context surrounding that particular verse
Yeah.
because you can read a verse and take it one way, but if you then kind of go bird's eye view and look at the surrounding like the verses before, after, the chapters before, after, the historical, cultural context of when that particular book was written, you
Yes.
can learn so much more of why something was written that way. Like, we just did the book of James, and I'm like, "Wow,
Yeah.
I love James."
Yeah.
And now we're heading into Revelations.
Which is just like
Right, which is like, "Okay, I don't know if my brain's ready for this,
Yeah.
but I think it'll be so good." Because I actually fun fact, I've never read through the full book of Revelations,
Mhm.
ever.
It's insane. It's
And
crazy.
so I'm really excited.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've heard wild things about it.
Mhm.
Which it makes it feel like it's like a forbidden book of the Bible. When I say that, it's not. I promise.
Yeah.
It's just the last one, and I just never make it that far back in
I
my Bible.
I think sometimes too utilizing, like a devotional or a specific like study of a book of the Bible
Yeah.
is helpful, which is a lot of what I lean on, when I kind of go rogue and I pick a book, that's typically what I lean on kind of as supplement because it also gives you discernment of like you said, the context or what it means or kind of the someone has clearly studied the theology behind this. And
Mhm.
so I know that I can read it and apply it correctly versus just skipping around and applying verses based on how I feel.
Right, or how you wanna perceive that
Hmm.
verse.
Yeah, because sometimes we talked about this last episode and probably a lot of episodes in the past, how, you know, the Bible can at you or call you out or be uncomfortable. And so sometimes our brains and our hearts want to be like, yeah, I don't think he meant it that way. And
Right.
sometimes it is uncomfortable and it is calling you out to refine
In the way
you.
that you didn't wanna be called out. You're
Yeah.
like, "Okay."
Yep.
So that's kinda what we're gonna do here today, friends. We are gonna take John 4, the woman at the well, or for some of you guys know of Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman.
Hmm.
And we're gonna read through the passage together. We're gonna kinda talk about it and then look at a little bit of some application.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna read through this. If you want to follow along, we're starting in John 4, chapter 4, verse 1. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called, I'm gonna botch this, Sychar?
Sinkar, yeah.
Yeah, that's a just say it really fast with confidence, and it's probably right. Near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't go thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshiped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." And that's where we are going to wrap up for the reading.
Mhm.
So there's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
I feel like sometimes at church when they're, like, reading the passage before we talk about it, I'm, like, in La La Land, then, like, "What'd we talk about?"
Yeah.
And so it's, like, relearning what we talked about. So sometimes it's hard to just listen. It's way easier, like we said, if you grab your Bible and follow along, but we're gonna kinda break it down, um, kinda bit by bit and talk about interesting things that we found through this, and talking about Jesus's character and otherwise, through it. So hang tight with us. We're gonna go there. Let's just start with, after reading it, what are kind of some of the initial thoughts or initial things that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I would say it's very she wasn't shy. Well, she didn't really know who he was. She wasn't shy to be, like, kind of testing him a little bit of, like, "Why would you ask this of me? Like,
Mhm.
we don't mix."
Yeah.
And in Jesus' true nature, he's, like, stripping boundaries, he's stripping
Mhm.
cultural norms, which you can kind of really see that in the conversation back and forth. Um What is funny is that it was talking about how the true worshipers will worship, and I was like, "Wow, we just did an episode on worship.
Yeah.
How funny." Like, how
Yeah.
God would just be like, "Let's interweave these
And
together."
I mean, I've read this a million times. It feels like I never noticed that before. So yeah, like you said, kind of ironic how your brain is attuned to things at any given time. But
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and you're talking about how she wasn't shy. Obviously, Jesus isn't shy. We know this about him. Um, and how she's kind of challenging the norms and he's trying to break them down. Which of course you are, Jesus. How silly. But my version says Jesus and the woman of Samaria. Some versions say just the woman at the well. But Samaritans and Jews did not mix. It was kind of like, I don't really know how to describe it other than they were kind of just polarizing groups of people.
Mhm.
Like they just they felt like they believed different things. Each of them felt like they were holier than thou in a weird way. There was just a lot of unrest between the groups of people, and so
It's kind of like high school drama.
yeah,
Like, when you have, like, the popular kids and the, like, wannabe popular kids that aren't, like, quite at that, like, premium level.
yeah, yeah, and so there was just a lot of different things, both in like a religious aspect and also kind of in a governmental aspect, um, and so for better or worse, they just like didn't associate with each other, and so Jesus kind of took this route through Samaria, which I don't wanna call it a roundabout way back home, but sort of, um, to go to this appointment. It was a God appointment, right? Like,
Mhm.
he's both human and fully God, so he knew who he was gonna meet along the way,
Right.
and that's something I think sometimes I forget it while I'm reading is, like, Jesus is fully human. He's just, like, walking this way, and he's like, "Man, I'm tired. I need a drink of water." No, he actually, like, knew he was gonna have this appointment, and
Mhm.
so there's a significance behind it, so why? You kind of have to
Right.
continue to ask yourself, "Why?" Um, and like you said, she isn't shy. She's like, "Why are you asking me? We're not supposed to be talking, like, we don't associate." And he kind of continues to say, like, "Give me a drink. I'm thirsty." But it's the middle of the day, it says it's noon, and she's out there gathering water. So, like, it's literally just those 2 around.
Mhm.
which is so interesting.
And I would say with that, of like, it's just those two, it's noon. The first question you would ask is, why is she gathering water in the middle of the day when it's hot? Because most people back in that time are going and getting water either very early in the morning or in the evening once it cools down a little bit.
Mhm.
And you have to look at this context of she's considered an outcast. You see that Jesus calls her out that she's had 5 husbands. The
Mhm.
current man that she lives with is not her husband.
Mhm.
So she's now considered an exile in a way.
Mhm.
And so, of course, she's going to have to go to get water in the middle of the day. And what does Jesus like to use? He loves to use like imperfect people
Mhm.
to advance the gospel.
Yep.
And Jesus also in now Samaria is kind of in a weird way in exile too.
Yep.
Because he's like, Jews don't associate with Samaritans. And she's like, I can't associate with my own Samaritan people because of my past and my history,
Mhm.
which I think is very interesting and very intriguing that like this divine appointment so like fully like just advances because later on like the Samaritan woman does go back to the city and be like and is like I literally just like see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? And then they all came out of the town and made their way towards Jesus.
Mhm.
And that's a little bit later in chapter 4. And it's like, okay, now we're seeing this crowd of Samaritans going and meeting this Jew who could potentially be the Messiah.
Mhm. And I think, you know, big picture, it's a he uses unexpected people to do amazing things, right?
Mhm.
And bring people to him, right? Um, as long as, we have open hands, much like this girl, you could see her heart starts to turn. But I think more than anything, she's in exile. She's out at noon and she's thirsty. Like it's like kind of a metaphor, right? Like literally they're in the desert, like they're
Yeah.
thirsty. And it's hot at noon. That's why people don't go out in the middle of the day. So she's kind of trying to avoid people. She's like, I'll be safe at noon. It's the hottest part of the day. No one else is going to be there. And then she's like, oh, great. Someone's going to be here pestering me and bothering me. Probably, Jesus is talking to her about how she's had 5 husbands and the person that she's with is not even her husband right now.
Yeah.
Like, that's probably just par for the course for her and makes her feel very ashamed because that's what she was going there at noon to avoid in the first place. Um, but there's kind of a metaphor there where, like, Jesus is saying he's thirsty. She's there gathering water because she's thirsty. And he inserts kind of that thing of living water. Um, it says, uh, if you knew the gift of God and who it is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water, to which she says, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Like I want some of that. She's actually thirsty.
Mhm.
She's lonely. She's outcast. She's been through multiple like divorces, right? Like she's longing for
She's
something,
longing for something that's not fulfilling her.
right? And I mean, same thing, when we have shame ourselves, like we want to be avoidant and
Yeah.
we cover ourselves up. We either avoid seeing people, we avoid, connecting with people, or we like literally cover up. We, like some
Yeah.
people baggy clothes, some people tons of makeup. Like we make ourselves up to be better so that we don't have to feel that shame. And it's just like literally a band-aid, right?
Mhm.
But it's just interesting that like kind of that metaphor
Yeah.
too.
And I really love in these kind of stories when you're just kind of observing, you're reading through a scripture passage to kind of see like what are some patterns, what are some trends. And as I was kind of going through this encounter that she's having with the Lord,
Mhm.
there's like 4 turning points that all start with like it's like almost a U-turn.
Mhm.
And there's 4 points that you see this U-turn. And in so verses 7 through 9, she has this unexpected experience. So that's her first U-turn
Mhm.
where she's going to the well. Jesus is like, "Will you give me a drink?" She's like, "We don't mix."
Mhm.
And then it's like Jesus is talking about this like if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water.
Yeah, like the pushback and the rebuttal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you continue on, she asks the questions, where can you get this living water? Jesus doesn't in that point, it's an unanswered question at this
Mhm.
point. Jesus actually doesn't really get to this point right away.
Mhm.
So now we have an unexpected experience,
Mhm.
an unanswered question. So we have our
Mhm.
second U-turn.
Yep.
And then a little bit down in verses 21 through 23, she's now being uprooted
Mm.
because now Jesus is calling out in this whole um like believe me, a time is coming, like I know your history, but like I'm going to uproot you from what you've known to like something that's coming in the future.
Mhm.
And she's like, what? Like this is all I know. He's like, no, 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 no. I'm going to uproot you. Things are going to be a little bit different around
Mhm.
here soon. And then it goes into verses 28 through 30 when she's going back to the town after her encounter with Jesus, and she's uplifted. She's excited. So you see this whole like U-turn from, I guess I'll go this way so it's kind of like if you're
Mhm.
watching, you have this unexpected experience, an unanswered question, being uprooted and now uplifted.
Mhm.
And it creates kind of this U-turn experience.
Yeah, because she's like, pushback, questioning, considering going.
Mhm.
And then in the midst of all of that, kind of that turning point is when we think about being called out today in today's culture, and it's like, ooh, like you're being roasted, you're being
Right. It's not always a
shamed.
good thing.
Right. Like being called out. He's calling her out, but he's calling her out of that place without shame. Like he's simply
Mhm.
like telling her her history, period. Like it has no shame attachment. It has no, like he's not degrading her. He's just simply stating like
The fact.
I know your heart.
Mhm.
I know where you've been. I see you is what he's saying, which is where that turning point starts to happen between
Yeah.
like questioning and pushback and like uprooting and going, like you said, which is so interesting.
Absolutely.
Because typically you don't think of those situations as being a fluffy like, "Ooh, I'm going to believe you now." You think of it as an uncomfy space, but that uncomfortable led to that pivot, I guess, that U-turn.
For sure. I am looking up something and I'll find it eventually because this reminded me of something that I wrote while back. But I honestly, truthfully, I'm human and can't always remember. And so God bless that we have an online resource tool called our website where everything is housed because wow. What would you say for you, Alyssa? Like what would be like, maybe someone who's reading this, like what would be maybe like something that they're like, okay, what's the application in this though? Like how do I apply this story,
Mhm.
this encounter to my own encounters with Jesus? And I think you were kind of onto something of how of Jesus not calling out our past to shame us, but calling out our past to bring us to redemption.
Mhm. Yep. Well, first, kind of piggybacking off of that, what I had just talked about is being able to come to him open-handed with your junk, asking for forgiveness and receiving his grace. Because grace is an undeserved gift, right? And so being able to allow him to read your mail,
Honestly. Honestly.
whether you like it or not, and then, and having that humble posture to be able to then receive his forgiveness and move forward from that, because to repent is to like make a pivot, right? You're turning from that. You're turning from, in her case, sleeping around, we'll say. Or you're turning from lying your way through something, or you're turning from whatever it is, right? That's being repentant and like truly asking for forgiveness for what you're doing, because you're not going to do that anymore then. Um and so then from there, when you're able to do that, you're able to step into what God has for you. That's kind of one turning point or application. Another application going a little bit further back, and then after that, talking about a point going forward. Another application is it's okay to question God and wrestle with him, because essentially that's what she's doing, just in a very conversational way.
Because she doesn't know that he's God
Yeah.
at that point.
Yep.
Like, she's just thinking this is some random Jew that she's talking with.
Yep. And so it's okay to, question God, because inevitably when you question God, you dive deeper into his character, you dive deeper into his truth that he speaks over situations in your life, you gain discernment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important too. And then kind of moving forward, we talked about how, like, she was thirsty, she was longing for something. I'm just going to read a little bit further down because it's something we didn't read because I was going to save it. The woman said to him, this is starting in verse 25. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he is going to tell us all the things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Just then the disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, What do you seek, or why are you talking with her? So the woman left her water jar and went into town and said to the people, Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Can this be the Christ? They went out of town and were coming to him. And then the story goes on, right? So she draws this unexpected person, this questioning person, this person with a past is then utilized, like, filled with joy from him because her mail was read, she was seen as she is, she was loved as she is, and she was sent out and brought people to him, right? That's kind of what we're called to do. But I think something that really stuck out to me at one point when I was studying this, John 4 passage in general was she was thirsty, literally physically getting water because she needed water. And that probably gave her some value in her household with the man she was with is like,
Yeah.
We'll go draw water. Like, I need water. I'm out working. I need water. And so then she would be able to provide that for him, right? But she was also thirsty. But then she was thirsty metaphorically. She was longing for something and she was never satisfied. Hence all the men or, not having any people, other women that she hung out with or
She was
whatever.
thirsty for community, almost in a way, relationship.
Yep. But the thing that she went to get, water, using the jar, she left that there.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to town. So the thing,
there's symbolism in people's actions.
yeah, and like the thing that she felt, I don't want to say was her identity, that might not be the way to say it, but the thing that she felt made her helpful or worthy, she left there and was like, no, I don't need that anymore. Like, I don't need to bring back the water to make me have value.
Yeah.
Because he gives me value, right? Like, she's starting to understand that or whatever, and she leaves that there. And I think sometimes we walk through life and we're like, yeah, God, you can have this sin. Yeah, you can have this part of my life. You can have that part of my life, but do not touch that relationship or do not touch that, like, my job, or do not touch that talent. Like, we give him almost everything, but we leave like one finger on one thing because we're like, but I like that. That makes people like me, right? That makes me feel like I have value.
Exactly.
But Jesus is saying, I want you to leave all of it and follow me.
And it's like this idea, and it comes from our Be Bold Bible study that, again, we currently have on our website. So if you are looking for a good tool to start with Bible study, devotionals, I think we have 5 or 6 out there right now that you
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug, that you can download and kind of start this. And in day 3 of week 2 of our Be Bold series, I actually talk about John 4 and how it's almost this concept of, like, find and be found.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jesus finds you, but you're going to be found in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is where your satisfaction is.
Mm-hmm.
And the Samaritan woman's experience with God was a very small encounter.
Yes. Like, it was probably 2 minutes.
Right. It wasn't very long. But then you look at, like, Acts chapter 9 with Paul, later Saul, who got, blinded by the light of God.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very big encounter because they both have U-turn experiences, if you think about it. Like, and this is diving super far deep, so stick with me, y'all. But you can see, like, when we were talking about patterns in the Bible, like, once you kind of dive deep into the stories, you're like, oh, that sounds familiar. Where have I maybe seen that before? John chapter 4, Acts chapter 9. I really encourage you to, like, compare and contrast the two and their experiences with the Lord. Because if we look at, like, encountering God in an unexpected, okay, so our first step in this U-turn experience, the Samaritan woman didn't know she was going to talk to a Jew.
Mm.
Paul, even though it was a little bit more dramatic, like, he didn't know he was going to be, like, blinded.
He didn't walk out today and be like, I'm going to go blind today.
Right. It was, like, very much, like, this beam of light, like, from heaven comes down, floors, like, Saul to the ground, basically. And this huge voice just comes saying, why do you persecute me? Like, okay, not scary at all.
Mhm.
Very unexpected. Okay, now their second step of encountering God can answer our unanswered questions. What's the question the woman at the well asked? Where can I find this living water?
Mhm.
Paul's question is, who are you, Lord? Okay, hefty.
But also is like, who are you, Lord?
You're like,
Didn't you just say who it is? I don't know.
Exactly. And then they have their third step of encountering God uproots our old ways of life. So the Samaritan woman is, they're kind of on two separate extremes. Like, the Samaritan woman experiences an uproot in her life of just, like, the Lord calling her past, not shaming her, where Paul actually, like, legit does a 180 turn his life from persecuting Christians to becoming a disciple himself and getting a new name. Talk about an uproot of your life in that fact. And then encountering God, our fourth point of uplifts us to share the good news. Paul, being a disciple, goes into share. I wouldn't say he was a disciple like one of the original 12, but he was a disciple sharing the Lord's gospel mission. He goes out and starts sharing the gospel. The Samaritan woman goes back into town and is like, come meet the man who could be the Messiah. Two very extremes, but both have some sort of U-turn experience when encountering God.
And, both being fully known, like, as the pivot point. Like, you're persecuting me. What the heck?
But God doesn't shame that.
Right.
He doesn't shame the Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
He doesn't shame Paul.
Yep.
And
Saul,
just
Paul.
knowing them for who they are, being fully known and fully found.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's super important when you're going through to understand that the Bible is so intricately woven and
So,
like
emphasis.
beyond what we could even comprehend, period. Like it just is, right? And it's living, breathing God, right? Like it is the truth. And so being able to, as you continue to grow in your understanding, you'll start to be able to draw these lines like Rebecca just did. Like, oh, there's another example of somebody who goes through this, like, very different scenario, but funny how God utilizes this process. And so let's go through the process again. Like, that's probably something applicable to everybody, including myself, that we could probably utilize as our challenge for the week. Going through something unexpected. There's an unexpected scenario. Like, have you had a scenario in your life that was really unexpected? And or are you going through that right now? And where do you see God in that? Or do you see God in that, maybe, depending on if it's current or past or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
That's the first part of that U-turn experience, like you said. Second, unanswered question.
Unanswered question, yeah.
So what question do you have right now that you feel God is not answering? And what does God say? Like, what is the truth about God's character, even when we don't have an answer? Right? Because he didn't answer her question, not in an avoidant manner, but continued to pour truth into her. Like in
his
this
character is that he satisfies.
Yep. And he continued to, like, be consistent and truthful, like,
Mhm.
in the process. He wasn't avoidant. He didn't, like, just cut off the conversation and be like, "Peace out, I'm going to Galilee." Like,
Right.
he didn't leave her on red.
Yeah.
God doesn't ghost you.
We're
Uh,
really making this, like, very 21st century, and I
well,
love
but,
it.
like, I
He
think it
doesn't leave you on red, he doesn't ghost you.
but it's true, like, we can joke about it all we want, but that is the truth,
Yeah.
and it is very applicable, so, unexpected, unanswered question. Third one is?
Uprooted. So
Mhm,
how is maybe God calling you out, not in shame, but to uproot your life
mhm.
to something of higher, I don't wanna say higher value, but, like, of higher
Calling,
calling.
like, on his path, right?
Yeah.
Where he's leading you.
And kind of like, is there like a bad habit, or is there like, I mean, even if it's just being like calling out a bad relationship, like, and sometimes that's really hard to be like, oh, but that's a person I really love spending time with. Friend, not friend, like platonic, not whatever,
Mhm,
to like be like, oh, I have to uproot myself from this relationship to a relationship that is of higher calling.
yeah, and in that being uprooted, what is God calling you to lay down? Like, it's not always, like, stepping away from something, it's laying down something, whether that's, like, holding a grudge,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, putting your identity into something that isn't him, because anything other than God makes a really crappy God, right? Like, what is the thing he's calling you to lay down, to repent of, to give to him and
Mm-hmm.
stop carrying?
Yeah.
Like her jar, right? Um and so sometimes it's not necessarily an active step away from something. Sometimes it's laying down,
The jar. Or
laying
laying
down the
down the
thing you're
old.
carrying.
Or the old, I mean, that's kind of like the jar was like, what's that thing? And like for Saul or Paul, it was his actual previous life.
Mhm.
Like he got a new name as Paul.
Mhm. Literally a new identity
Like literally a new identity in
in Christ,
Jesus.
but
And so it's like there's again very different extremes, but the same concept of being uprooted. Like God's like, I would say like cultivating you to something more,
Mhm.
helping you grow to something more. And then that final step of uplifted, like that idea of, how can you share this experience with other people to not only share like how it uplifted you in your walk with the Lord, but how it could uplift someone who maybe is going through that same or something similar of a situation in their own
Mhm.
life. Like, how do you feel maybe a little bit more encouraged or a little bit more challenged or a little bit more uplifted or
Mhm.
excited for something that's a little bit new? I think of like, I got unexpected work just wasn't super what I thought it would be.
Mhm.
The unanswered question, God, where should I go? Am I supposed to stay here? Am I supposed to leave?
And feeling radio silent in
And
that.
feeling super radio silent in
Mhm.
that and be like, I have no idea. To then be uprooted to be like, okay, nope, I'm gonna take a step away from this job. I'm gonna kind of do a little 180 turn of like my life, kind of find something that is going to be a little bit more stable, consistent, and then uplifting that of like, okay, this is like God showed himself in his provision of a new job, of like a little bit more sleep at night, of things that I'm like, okay, this is really exciting. Like again, a very small thing in my life, but
Mhm.
has a similar kind of pathway.
Yeah, and learning too in the midst of that. I mean, I can say this from the outside. But learning in the midst of that too, like, my identity is not my work can simply be an 8 to 4 or a 9 to 5.
Mhm.
It's not supposed to be my identity, but it doesn't have to be, like, my whole life. And so that
Exactly.
that also creates breathing room to see, like, where is God calling you
Yeah.
while you do that, right? Like,
Mhm.
he's calling you to be there and to be present and to be a light in that space, but, like, outside of that 8 to 4, where is he calling you? And what space is he leaving,
Yeah.
you know? And in that step of obedience, what space are you leaving for him to use? Um, and I think also kind of echoing that, being able to go out and share your testimony, share that this experience that you've just gone through, right? Like, sometimes it's a little bit more instantaneous, and sometimes you kind of have to wrestle with, like, whoa, like, I feel called out. and wrestle in that space of like, but I wasn't shamed. What does God say about me?
Mm-hmm.
Getting filled back up and then being able to share. It's not always this instantaneous thing. Like in these two stories, they were very like ready to go. And it
Right.
was instant almost. And they were like,
Right.
wow. And in some instances it is like, holy cow, I have to text these guys right now and tell them all about
Yeah.
this revelation I
But it
had.
also could be a whole couple month-long process.
Or
Like,
a
there's
year,
been,
whatever.
Or a year.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at Saul or Paul, I think he was probably blind for, was it like 3 days, 2
Mhm.
weeks, something like that. 3 days,
I think 3.
possibly. Could be, maybe fact check that.
Read and find out. Let us know.
Exactly. That's your challenge. Read and find out if that's true. Let us know. But like the Samaritan woman, maybe 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, like checking out with a clerk at the grocery store, that amount of time.
Right. Saul Paul, maybe 3 to 5 business days.
Yeah.
There's been experiences where I have U-turn experiences that are 4 months long, 5 months long, 2 years long. And I'm sure you've had the same thing. Like, it's not, like you had said, it's not an instantaneous, like, oh, I've had this little U-turn.
But
it's a process.
Yeah, in the midst of being able to be disciplined in that, to continue to seek the Lord, to worship, to pray, to be in community, eventually you start to see that you've been through that U-turn and you didn't even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're like, oh, I'm here now.
Right.
Look at all that. And then you're able to go out and praise about it.
Yeah.
And share your experience and uplift people who are in those spaces too. But
absolutely,
give yourself grace that it might not be that 3 to 5 minute transaction.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So with that, friends, a lot to unpack here. I encourage you, go back, read through the passage again, listen back to this again. There's things that Alyssa even said, like the jar, of her leaving the jar behind, that I was like, I never noticed that. And you're going to find something a little bit different every single time that you read it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe something that we say that's a little bit different, or hits just a little bit more of like a different frequency with you.
Yeah.
There's always something to constantly learn, grow from, understand from, a little aha God moments every time that you open up the word. And so, challenge to you, read through John 4, read through Acts 9, go through those 4 U-turn points in the story. Maybe find another story and see if there's another U-turn. Where is that? Go through a situation that you might be currently going through, or a past situation that you've gone through, and how have you seen that like U-turn experience in your life?
And know too that, I mean, the more, like you said, the more you read it, the more it's going to hit you in different ways, or you're going to be exposed to more truth in the verses that you're reading. But also know that it's okay to question and wrestle through it with someone in your community, with a mentor, with a pastor. Being able to ask questions to gain the truth in the passage is sometimes needed and necessary. And so that's also something that you might have to do.
Grab your Bible, go to a coffee shop, and dive in. Ask hard questions. God does not shy away from hard questions. He wants us to ask those questions, because when we ask those questions, he gets to answer them for us.
Just maybe not quite in the way we expect.
Or in your time.
Yeah.
So with that, any other last minute challenges that you have? Aha God moments?
I think just being able to read and wrestle through your own U-turn and then challenge a friend. I think let's make a ripple effect in that, because inevitably you're going to be able to uplift someone with yours, or you might be uplifted by someone else's too. And it's a good place to be.
So with that, friends, have fun. Go find those aha moments. Go find those U-turns. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and rate our show to stay up to date on our latest episode releases. We'd love to hear from you, so head on over to our website or the gram, say hi, be encouraged, and join the movement as we continue to boldly seek after Jesus together. We'll see you next time on the Between the Pages podcast.